I will comment out the later two here, and that looks good. Now that we are passing categories to the view, we can work on the view and display all the category properties. Let me do that in the next video. We are passing the category that we retrieved to our view. We need to create this view, so we can right-click here, add view, empty view. We will have to rename this to be edit here. And we will remove everything right here. Now let me also show you one thing different. Let me delete this view and let me add that once again. We also have something called as razor view. Let's add that and see what is different. Now when we add this, there are quite a few properties that needs to be scaffolded. First we have the view name, which is edit. Now I have changed the default font of Visual Studio. Because of that it is enlarged and difficult to read. But here we have the view name of edit, and with the razor view we can have different template for create, details, edit, and much more. We will go with the empty one here, and if you go with create or something else, you have more configuration, which we will see in the upcoming videos. Now this is not a partial view, so we will skip that, and you can also skip the underscore layout page because it already gets added by default. When you add that, it will scaffold few things, and sometimes I have seen this scaffolding is corrupted and it does not work and gives you random error message. Now because we selected the underscore layout as null, you can see it rendered like a new HTML page. That is not what we want, so let me delete that again. And let's try that once again. Add view, razor view, and we will say use layout page. When we use the default layout page, you can see that is more close to what we have, and it got added in the right place. Now of course we will remove everything. We will leave the edit here, but actually what we can do is copy everything that we have in create and paste it for edit, because it will look exactly the same. Rather than create category, it will be edit category. With that configured, let me change this from create to update, and let me run the project. We will come back and modify this edit page, but let me see how the application looks right now. Perfect. To your surprise, when you hit edit category, it automatically populates the name and display order. The reason behind that is the category model that is being passed from the edit already has those populated, and in the edit we are using tag helpers. So if name has some value, it will automatically be displayed. And same applies for display order. So that is great news. We have validations that were already added. So if you try to remove display order, we have the client-side validation. So with that configured, our edit category view is looking good right now. We will have to change one thing, but I will show you that in the next video. But what we have to focus on is the post action method in category, where we will retrieve an object and we have to update the category. We have seen how to create a new category using Entity Framework Core. But now how do we update that category? We will remove this validation that is not needed. When we are updating, we will do the client-side validation. That looks good. On top of that, rather than add, EF Core has a method for update, and there we have to pass the OBJ and it will update that category. Now how will that update? Based on the ID that is populated in the object here, it will automatically update all the other properties that are there for that category in the database. It is super simple, but you can see how Entity Framework Core has reduced all the heavy lifting that we have to do when we were updating a record. With that, let me continue from the next video. Now that we have added the code for update category, let me run the application and see that in action. When we go to category here, we will try to edit action here, and let me update that to action 111 and display order to be 5. Right now it will work. Perfect. You can see it got updated. If we update that back to what it was, that should also work. And perfect. So with that, the edit functionality is working as expected. But there is one thing that I will tell you right now. When you add a debugging point here, and if you try to update this to let's say 7, you will notice in OBJ ID is populated. Now the reason ID is populated is if we go to our edit here, you can see we do not have that in the field. Typically we require that in an input field like this, where we will say ASP4 is ID and it will be a hidden field. But only because the variable name is ID, this line or input variable is not required. If for some reason your ID was category ID or anything else, then you will have to add the hidden property. Else what will happen is rather than editing an existing record, it will keep that record and it will add a new record on top of that with the new name that you edited. I will show that in the upcoming videos when we work with different model as well. But that is something that I want you to remember. When you try to edit, if you see a new record is being added, add a debugging point here and I can guarantee you that the ID here is 0. Because of that, if you pass an ID with 0 to update statement in Entity Framework Core, it will think that okay, since the ID is 0, you want me to create a new record because there will be no record with the ID of 0. That is the default behavior. So once again, if you ever try to update a record and it is creating a new record, make sure the ID is populated here. If that does not work, then you have to add the hidden property like I have shown on line 4. We will see that in action in the later videos, but I wanted to give you some idea on that right now. But perfect. With that, we are able to edit our categories, and the last functionality that we have is deleting a category. Finally, we will work on deleting a category. When we delete a category, we want to display everything that we do in edit, but everything will be disabled. So let me copy what we have for edit get and post action method and paste it one more time here. We will rename that to be delete. Now in the delete post, you can get the complete category object, or you can just get the ID that user wants to delete. In that case, we cannot use the same name for the action method because then the parameters are also same for get and post. So we will have to rename this to be delete post, and we have to explicitly tell here that name is delete for this endpoint. Because in the form when we are posting, it will look for the same delete action method. In order to do that with HTTP post, we can explicitly say that this endpoint's action name is delete, even though we have a different name right here. The get action method looks good. We want to retrieve that category, but how do we delete that category? Now when we have to delete, we first have to find that category from database. So we will say category obj is equal to _db.categories.find based on the ID. And then if obj is null, we will return not found. If obj is not null on _db, we have categories, and there we have remove method, which expects the category object. So we can pass the obj that we retrieved from the database and pass that. Finally, we will have to save the changes and return back to the index action. And perfect, that looks good. With that, we have the get and post action methods for delete. Let me continue from the next video. We have the delete get and delete post action method. Let me remove the comments here. And now we want to work on adding the view. So right click on delete, add view, empty view. Make sure to change the name to be delete.cshtml. And perfect. Now the view will look exactly same as we have for edit here. So let me copy that and paste it for our delete. Few things we have to update is when we delete, we will not have any validation. So let me remove them, and the fields here will be disabled. User cannot edit anything here, and this will be delete category. Also the button color will be danger, and it will be delete record. That looks good. Inside the index, when we are calling delete here, we will have to pass the route ID. That way we will know which category user wants to delete. We will call that ID because in the controller, that is what we have right here. Now when we post, we already saw we do not need the ID in the hidden property, but I always like to add that. That way there is nothing magic going on. We know that we have ID in the hidden property, and when we submit, that will be populated. We can also do the same thing in edit, even though for ID it is not required, but for other properties it will be, so it does not harm to add this particular line in edit and in delete. With that, I believe everything here looks good. Let me run the application and see if that works. We go to category here. We have action, which is 7 display order. Let me try to delete test here. Perfect, everything is disabled. Hit the delete button and great. That has been deleted. If I switch back to SQL Server and examine the categories table, we do not have that test anymore. So great, all the CRUD operations are working for our category. Let me continue from the next video. We have the CRUD functionality that is working, but whenever we create, edit or delete a category, what if we want to display a notification here that record was created, updated or deleted successfully? For that we have something special in .NET Core, which is temp data. If you assign a value in temp data, it is only available for the next render. So basically, let's say on the create button we say if everything was successful, we can add a message to temp data, then it will only be available to the next page that is rendered. When we create, we redirect them to the category list, so it will only be available on this render. If you refresh that page, then temp data goes away. Temp data has been created in the .NET framework with that sole purpose that if you have to display a notification on the next page, then you add some value in temp data. Let me show you on how that will work. Let me switch back to the code here, stop the application, and we have the index page. Before we do that in the controller, we will assign something on post. Once it is successful, before we redirect here, we can add something to temp data, and there we have to give that a key name. Let me call that as success message. In there we will add a message category created successfully. That is the key name that we have given to something in temp data. And based on that key name, we can access its value. Let me copy that and do that in edit post. Before we redirect, we will say category updated successfully. And when we delete, before we redirect, we will say category deleted successfully. Now we have added the message in our temp data with the key name of success, but where do we display that? We will display that on the index page at the very top here. What I can do is add an if condition and check if temp data with the key name of success. If that is not null, then we want to display that, let's say in an H2 for now. To display that, we will again use the razor syntax @, and we can access the success. Simple as that. I have an extra S here, remove that, and let's run that. We go to category here. Let me try to create a category, test category 4, and perfect, we have category created successfully. Now if you refresh here, that goes away. So temp data only stays there for one request and then it goes away. If you try to edit this to let's say 44, we have category updated, and if you refresh here, that goes away. So with that we have seen temp data in action, and that is a great feature when you have to display notification. We have used temp data to display the success notification. But what if we had more than one page? Let's say in our website we have category, we have something called as cover type, products, and we want to perform CRUD operations on all of them. Then rather than adding the same logic or same code that we have in one page, we will be reusing that on multiple pages. And right now it is success. You might also have temp data for error and display a corresponding error message. Rather than adding the same code in all the places, it is best to use partial views. We have already seen one of the partial view, which was validation scripts partial. But this time we want to move our temp data logic in its own partial view. How can we do that? Well, doing that is super simple again. In the solution here, where we have the shared folder, we will right click, add a new view. We will go with the empty view, and the name for partial view, I typically like to write underscore. That way, looking at that, I can tell that this will be a partial view. I will call this underscore notification.cshtml. We go to our index. Let me cut the if condition, paste it right here. Then let me copy this, paste it once again, and we will display error here. So if temp data of error is not null, then we display that error as well. We do not have this error right now, but I just added that code. Now how do we consume this partial view inside our index? That is simple. We have the partial tag here, and we need to give that a name. And for the name, make sure there is no spelling mistake, else it will not work. Perfect. So that way we have added or consumed the partial view that we just created. With that in place, let me run the project. It should work the same. Let me try to edit here. And perfect, we have category updated successfully. So with that very small example, we have seen how to create a partial view, and then on any page where we have to consume it, we can do that by adding just one line of code. On top of that, if we have to change the implementation of notification, we do that directly in the partial view, and all the views that are consuming this partial view will get that update. If it was not the case, then we will have to update it individually in all the places. So for all the reusable components in your page, you should be using partial views. With that basic idea, let me continue from the next video. When the update, create or delete is successful, rather than displaying this plain h2 tag here, it is best if we use something fancy. And for that we will be using Toastr. If you search for that, we have the first link here, and let me go to the demo page. We will click Show Toastr, and perfect. These notifications are much better than what we have. We have success, we have warning Toastr, and we have error Toastr as well. So let's see how we can add them in our project. It is a JavaScript library here, and we have the CDNs. Let me copy the CDN for CSS here, and where will we add our styling? We always do all the global stylings in underscore layout, so let me add that here. Link rel is equal to style sheet, and href, let me paste the CDN here. Perfect. Next, we need the JS as well. Now for JavaScript, we will have to add that inside the individual notification here. So when we are displaying that, we have to add that notification. So here I can add the script tag here, and src is equal to, paste that. And let me see, we need the closing tag as well. Perfect. The error should go away. That looks good. When we are using Toastr here, we also need jQuery. We already have that inside the lib here. So lib jQuery dist, and we have the minified version. We can use that. And let me add the closing tag as well. Perfect. That looks good. We will copy this, paste it for the error as well. And rather than using the .js here, let me use the minified version. That way when we move to production, we do not have to update anything, and we are using the minified ones. We will do the same for CSS as well. And perfect. Now finally, inside the underscore notification, we do not want a boring h2. Rather, we have to see how to use that. If we scroll down, we have 3 easy steps. We added the CSS and JS, and then we have toastr.info and the text right here. Pretty simple. Let me copy this, go back to our code, and where we have the temp data, before that, we will add toastr.success, and we need the success message right there. We will add a semicolon here, and we need to enclose this in a double quotes. Also, the toast here will be inside script. Type is equal to text / JavaScript. And perfect, that looks good. Let me copy this and paste it right here. This time it will be error here. Save that and run the application. We go to category here, try to edit the display order to 88. or rather 99, and perfect. We have the fancy notification. Now while we are here, I want to make one change. Right now the partial view is inside index.cshtml. But let's say this is a functionality that will be there across hundreds of pages. So rather than adding on all of them, we can also add that in underscore layout. So cut it from here. And where we have underscore layout, before the render body here, I can add the partial view. That way on all of the pages, this functionality will be available. We will have to rebuild and apply the changes here, and everything will still work the same. But now, wherever we need toaster notification, it will be available and we will not have to add the partial view for notification. Let's try delete here, and perfect. Everything is working as expected. With that, we have incorporated toaster notification in our project. Now think about this. If you did not have partial view on all the pages where you needed toaster notification, you would have to add this particular code on top of all the pages. And if in future when you wanted to change from toaster to something else, you will have to update that on all the pages where this code was present, which is not a good idea. And that is why you should be using partial views. So with that in place, let me continue from the next video. Now we have the bulky project, and there we are able to perform all the CRUD operations on categories. And right now what we are working on is an MVC project. But when it comes to .NET programming language, there is also another way you can write the same code, and that is using Razor pages rather than using models, views, and controllers. And the approach to Razor pages is somewhat similar to what we have been working in older .NET days, where we have a backend and a front-end page. So let me spend some time and try to replicate the same project that we have built using MVC, using Razor pages. That way within a short time, you will have a brief idea of how Razor pages actually work. So in our existing solution here, we can have multiple projects. One project that we have is Bulky Web. Let me add a new project here, and that will be of the type Razor pages. If you type Razor here, you can see we have the ASP.NET Core web app, and this is not the one with model, view, or controller. It is using the Razor pages content. So we will select that, hit the next button, project name, let me call that Bulky Web Razor _temp, and select the next button. Again, authentication will be none here, and everything stays the same. We will hit the create button, and that will add one more project in our solution, which will be Bulky Web Razor. Now if I set this as a startup project, it will run this particular website rather than the other one, and let me try to run that. When you run the project, you will see the default page looks exactly the same like we had for an MVC project. But this time you will notice some things are different. If you notice, the URL here is directly privacy. Previously it was home, which was the controller, and then privacy, which was the action method. But when we use Razor pages, we do not have any controllers. In the next video, let me first show you what is the differences between both the project type. Before anything else, we want to see what are some things that are similar between both the project. So let me expand the project here, and perfect. You will notice in the Razor project we have app settings.json. This is exactly same like we have in the MVC project, and all the connection or settings, we will place them in the app settings.json file. After that, the program.cs is also exactly same. Well, the functionality is same, but the files will be different. You can see in the MVC one, it added controllers with view, but in the Razor pages, it added builder.services.razor pages to the container. That way the application will know that it will be using Razor pages as compared to MVC, which is controllers and views. If you scroll down, the default route also, we had controller and action in an MVC application. But when it comes to Razor pages, the routing is straightforward and we have map Razor pages. Now the way routing works in a Razor page application is whatever is inside the pages folder, that will be the route. So if in pages folder there is an index page, you directly type index and that will be the default page. If you type privacy, we have the privacy page right here. So basically whatever the folder structure is there in the pages folder, that will be the exact routing that we will follow in the URL. And we will of course see that pretty shortly in the upcoming video. But we will come back to the pages folder in a second. Other than app settings and program.cs, we have www root, which is also exactly same as the MVC application. And then the property stays the same, dependencies stays the same. The only thing that is majorly different is we do not have controllers, models or views. We only have one thing, which are pages. And these pages are different than what we had for controllers or views. Here we have the index page, which is index.cshtml. If you double click that, it still has that Razor syntax where you can use the @ sign and use C# code, but on top of that there is something called as @page directive. This @page directive is used for the Razor pages, and if you expand the arrow here, we have the .cs file. This .cs file is not the code behind file that we had in traditional .NET application. It is a complete rewrite and it is basically a page model for the Razor page that we have. You can see it extends from the page model, which is inside the .NET Core package. Page model will have all the get and post endpoints that we typically had in the controller that we saw in the first project. So you can see onGet is the default handler for get action method. The naming here must match, so basically on is required, and then if it is a get, it will be get. If it is post, we will have the onPost handler. Now I will not go crazy deep into Razor pages because it has its own course and it can be lengthy, but I will give you a brief idea on how to perform CRUD operation in Razor pages. That way you are comfortable with Razor pages. Now inside pages you will see something common. In shared we have the underscore layout and validation scripts partial, exactly the same as MVC. We have view imports and view start, exactly the same, and we have an error page to display error message. But before we do anything else here, like working on the Razor pages or anything, I want to configure Entity Framework Core in this project. Configuring that will be exactly the same. So for that, what I will do is right click here, add a new folder, which will be for models, and I will actually copy the model that we have for category. Let me copy this, close that. In the models, add a new class. Do not copy the class and paste it here because then the namespace will be copied over. Rather, we will paste that here and perfect. So with that, we have added the category model in the Razor project. What your assignment is to configure Entity Framework Core in this project. It will require the exact packages that we did in MVC project, and you will have to create an application DB context class. That you will do inside the data folder. So configure all the steps, configure program.cs, make sure to seed the category as well. The last thing that I will do before I end this video is in app settings, let me copy this connection string from MVC, paste it right here, and I will change the database name from bulky to bulky_razor. Perfect. So you have the connection string in the Razor project. You need to configure Entity Framework Core, create the database, seed the category table with 3 categories, just like we did with the MVC project. That will give you a hands-on practice on setting up Entity Framework Core in a project. So complete all the steps, but do not update the database or add the migration. Do everything for the configuration, and when you are at the step of adding a migration, follow along with me in the next video. That way I want to show you one thing that you have to be careful about. So good luck with that assignment, and I will show you how to do that in the next video. I hope you were able to complete the assignment. Now when we have to use SQL Server, first thing that we need here are the NuGet packages. And we can do that in multiple ways. We already have those NuGet packages in the bulky web project, which is MVC. So if I right click on the solution here and select Manage NuGet Packages for Solution, well, you can notice here that .NET 8 Preview 2 has been released, but we will continue with the first preview that we have. That's okay. But what I want to tell you here is on the right side, you can see on bulky web, the version is installed. If you select the other project as well, then it will install the same version inside the Razor project as well. So if I install that, accept this, perfect. That package is installed inside the Razor project as well now. You can see that right here. The other packages here are not installed in the Razor project. So we can install them using the same method, but we can do something better. We know that we want the same packages that are in the web project, so we can right click, edit the project file, and I can copy all of the NuGet packages. We have the version here as well. Close that, and I will open the project file for Razor page. Inside there we only have one. We will remove that and paste everything that we copied from the MVC project. What that will do is it will automatically install all of the NuGet packages. Let me show that right here. So you can see everything is done automatically and we do not have to do much things. This is another way of working with NuGet packages, because if you directly add in the project file, that is the ultimate location where a NuGet package is added, and from there it will be installed and available in your project. Our packages are installed now. We need to work on adding the application DB context here. So let me add that. And then we can go to the data, application DB context, copy everything, and paste it right here. Now I hope you did not copy and paste everything and you manually typed that, because you have to learn on how to seed the data, how to override the onModel creating, how to add dbset, and so on. When we add the using statement, do not add reference to bulky web. We need from the current project, which is bulky web Razor. Perfect. DB context looks good. Next we need program.cs. There we have to add the connection string. Copy this line, close that, go to program.cs here, and we will add that. We will add the using statement as well. And perfect. That looks good. Finally, the last thing that we have to do is add migration and create the tables. For that, we will go to Tools, Package Manager Console, and here you have to be careful about one thing. Previously, we only had one project, so the default project was Bulky Web. But now we want to add migrations and everything on the Razor project, so you have to select that, and you will say Add Migration, Add Category to DB. Perfect. If you take a look at the migration, it is adding category and it is inserting data. Looks good. Let me update the database. Perfect. That is done as well. If we go back to SQL Server, we should have a new database, which is Bulky Razor, and we should have the categories table with 3 categories. So Entity Framework Core has been set up in our project, and you can see how fast it is to get started with EF Core in .NET application. Now we want to work on the same functionalities that we have in the MVC project with category. In the web project or the MVC project, we had controller, but that is not something that we have when we work with Razor pages. There we have the pages, and in there we have to organize things. So what we will do is create a new folder for category, and inside there, for a list of all the categories, I will create a new Razor page. We don't have view here, we have Razor pages. When we say Razor page, we have the empty Razor page. We will get started with that. The index page, we can call that for categories where we are listing all the categories. But I have one small suggestion, so let me close this. And where we have the category, if you know in model we have the same name. If you want to use the same name, you can go ahead and do that, but then you will have to add the complete using statements many times. In order to avoid that, I will rename this to be categories. That way we do not have to be explicit. Then in categories, we will add the Razor page. Empty one, we want to start fresh, and let me call that index.cshtml. Now in this page, you notice something different than when we added a view in MVC. So again, in MVC, I use the term view. In Razor pages, we have the Razor page, and the CS file will be page model. That will be the terminology that I will be using. So in Razor page, we have at model that is already being defined. And if you examine the path, that is the exact file that we have in the CS file. If you think about that, in the MVC, we had to define that. In Razor pages, it already creates that CS file and adds that in the add statement, and before that we have the add page that defines that this will be a Razor page. We do not need this. Here we can just have an h1 and we can say category list like that. With that one line, let me run the Razor project. We will have the startup project as Razor throughout this section. So do that and we will run the project. And perfect. Now how will we route to the new page that we added? That is inside categories, so routing is pretty straightforward. Whatever is the location inside the pages folder, that will be the route. So categories and then index, and we have the category list. Now index is always optional, so if you remove that, it will load the same page. But with Razor pages, we do not have the complex routing of adding controller, action method, and then the route parameters. Razor pages has very straightforward routing. With that configured, let me continue from the next video. Now we have the category list here, but we need to load all the categories from database and display them. How will we do that? When we are working with controller, let me move back to the old application here. We used to get application DB context using dependency injection. and then we were easily able to retrieve all the categories. It will be same when we are working with the Razor project as well. In the Razor project, in the CS file which is page model, here we will have the constructor. First we will have a private read-only application db context. Let me call that _db and ctor tab for the constructor here, and we will get application db context, assign that to the local variable. After that, let me create a property which will be list of category, and that will hold all the categories. I will call that category list here, and we need to populate this using Entity Framework Core. So category list is equal to _db.categories.toList. That is exactly what we were doing in the controller, but now we have to do that in the onGet handler. Now when we have the onGet and post handler, we do not have to write return view. You can see the return type is void here, because whatever we are setting here in the model, it is easily accessible because that is the model that we have. So when we return back, we do not have to write anything else. It will automatically bind everything. So now all we have to do is on the index Razor page here, directly access that model and display all the categories. View, we can copy that from views. We have the category index, copy that and make sure to close this file because the names are same, so you might get confused and end up working on a different file. So if you have to copy that, minimize it and close the file. I will paste all the code that we copied right here, and we do not need the model anymore. Let's remove that. Then we have to worry about the tag helpers. Previously we had the tag helpers for controller and action. But with Razor pages, we have ASP page. Using ASP page, we can define the route where we have to go when we create a category that will be inside categories / we will create Razor page with the name of create. We do not have action there. We have to give the complete route like this. Now if you are not case sensitive, that's okay here. So let me add that. We scroll down, we have the table here, but where we have the model, we do not have the category list. We have that inside model. There will be a property with the name of category list. So if I go back, rather than model directly, in there we will have category list. Because model is the complete index model, inside there we have category list, and that can be easily accessed like here. We need to change the route here. This will be ASP page, and it will be category / edit, remove the action, and where we have to pass the ID, ASP route is still valid if you are working with Razor pages. So when we edit, if we have to pass the ID, we can pass ASP route ID and that will work. So copy this ASP page and paste that for delete. This will be delete. We will still pass the ID that needs to be edited and deleted. Everything else stays the same. With that configured, let me run the project and see if that works. We forgot one thing here. Let me go back while it is running. Inside the underscore layout, we have to add categories. So copy this li here. You can see we have the ASP page here. That will go to categories / index, and we display category here. Let me see how that looks here. We have category, click that, and perfect. Right now we are not using any boot swatch theme, so these are the default classes. but you can see everything is working with Razor Pages, and we have our index page that is functional. If you want to add the Bootstrap icons here, you can do that, but I think this looks good for the category list right now. Before I end the video, if I go back and in the CS/HTML, rather than on get here, if this was only get, you will notice things will not work because that on is required. If I click on category, you can see things are not working. So when we have a get action method inside Razor Pages, it must match the exact name on get or else it will not work. We are able to display all the categories. If I run the application again, and if I go to categories there, if I click the create new category, you can see it is not able to route to that page. If it was an MVC application, you will see an error message, page not found. But in Razor Pages, if it does not found, I have noticed it does not even redirect. So next we have to create these categories and the create page. We will open the Solution Explorer. Inside categories, I will add a new Razor page, which will be empty, and we will call that as create. Perfect. We have the corresponding page model. Now the UI will be exactly same. So we can go to Views, Category Create, copy, close that, and also minimize this, paste it right here, go to the top. We do not have a model for category, but we will have to create that in page model. So when we go to create CS/HTML.cs in the Razor project, here we will have to create that. On top of that, we need application DB context. So let me copy these lines, paste it here. We will have to change the constructor name to create model. Let me add the using statement here, and we do not have list of category. When we are creating, we will be working with one category. Add the using statement, and perfect. If we go to the Razor page here, we do not have name, but we have category.name. We will have to replace that in all the places. So let me do that. And perfect. We do not have controller, we have ASP page. That will be categories /index. And that looks good. Let me run the application and see if that works. We go to category here, create, and it is not working. In index, we need a / here. And perfect, that works. It loads the empty category. When we hit create, we have the validation as well, because in create here, we have validation scripts partial, and that is also present by default in Razor Pages. So you can see everything is the same. When we hit back to list, that doesn't work. We need a / there. And let me modify in index right here. This will be categories. Yep, that looks good. Perfect. So we can go back now, edit and delete. We have not added those pages, so that will not work. But create new category is working. If you type something and hit create, nothing happens. Because what we have right now in the page model is only the get handler, and that is not even doing anything. Because when we create a category, we want to load the empty page and display the text box, so that is okay. But how do we add a post endpoint here? So when we hit the submit button, we want to create that category. Let me show you that in the next video. Now we need to add a post endpoint here. And how will we do that? Well, adding that is super simple. We will say public. Return type will not be void here because when we create a category, we want to redirect to some Razor page, like let's say the index page for our category. So return type will be the same iAction result that we saw in MVC application. Then what will be the name? On will be required, but if we have to post something, then we have to write post keyword. And that is how we create post handlers in Razor pages. Now when we post, we will get the category object here. So we will get that. And let me call that obj here. Next, what we want to do is on db.categories, we want to add the object and underscore db.savechanges. After that, we want to redirect, so return. Previously, we have redirect to action, but in Razor pages, we have redirect to page, and we have to give it a name. We will call that the index page because we are in the same folder. That will work. With that configured, if we restart the application, things will not exactly work like we intend. Let me add a debugging point on the post here, and let me wait for the application to come up again. And let me go to category. Create a new category, populate something there, hit the create button. You will notice the obj here is null. Why is that? In category, we have the post here. It should populate at least category.name. That category is right here, but if you examine, that is also not populated. When we are working with Razor pages, if we want this property to be available when we are posting that, we have to add an attribute here, which is bind property. That will make sure that it binds this property, and when we post that, it will automatically be binded and available in the post handler. Once we do that, we no longer require anything in the parameter. Here we can directly access the category because that will be populated. Now let me run this and show that as well. We go to category here, create, type something here, and we examine the category. Perfect. We have display order as well as name, and we continue here. Great. That category has been added successfully. So when we work with Razor pages, we have to explicitly bind properties that we want to access on the post of the form. If you have more than one property, you can bind them individually, or what you can do is at the page model level here, we have something called as bind properties, and it will bind all the properties that you define in the page model. With that, if you run the application, it will work the same way. Let me try that as well. We will have test2, and we examine category. Perfect. That is populated. So those are the two ways to bind properties when we are working with Razor pages. Now with that brief overview, you know how to create the get handlers and post handlers. With that knowledge that you have, I want you to work on edit and delete functionalities as an assignment. So good luck with that assignment, and I will see you guys in the next video. We want to work on edit and delete functionality, so let me create those Razor pages in categories, add a Razor page, empty, and I will call that edit here. Next one that I want to create, right here, add a Razor page, and that will be delete.cshtml. First, let me pin this here, and where we have the create, let me copy everything and we will paste it in edit right here. We will also have to bind the properties because we will be posting some data. I will change the constructor name to be edit model and add the using statement for category as well. Perfect. Now when we are editing, we have to retrieve the category that a user wants to edit, and right here we will get the ID. Based on the ID that we receive here, we can check if ID is not null and if ID is not 0. In that case, we can populate the categories here, and let me make this nullable, that's okay. So we will load the category, else we do not want to do anything. So we will load category on the get handler, and on the post here we have to update. If I go to the web project here, category controller, on the post we were checking model state. We can do everything exactly the same. Well, we are in create. Let me copy the one that we have for edit here and paste it right here. So if model state is valid, we want to update, we have bind property, so we will have that category here, and perfect, that looks good. Let me comment out the temp data for now. We will redirect to the page, and perfect, that looks good. In the else part here, we can just return back to the page if the model state is not valid. So our edit logic is looking good. Let me work on the edit UI. So let me copy what we have for view, close this and the controller, minimize the web project, go to edit here and paste that, remove the model here, and everything will be inside category.id. Let me modify all of them. Now we have all the warnings here. I can fix that real quick, but we need the page here. ASP page will be categories and then index. Perfect, that looks good. If we go to edit page model, I can remove this, and then we will have only one warning if that is not found, but that's okay. We can fix that, but it is a warning and we know ID will be correct. If not, we can show a not found. But with that configured, let me run this and see if edit is functional. We will try to edit test with test33, and great, that is working. We should also have validation here. That looks good. I think in the UI, I have a mistake here. I will have to stop and restart. Category, edit, perfect. Let me see if I have that same mistake in the MVC project. We do not have that here, so that's okay. But everything is working. We have too many files open. Close all of them. And let me work on delete. Copy the view from the MVC project here, where we have the Razor project. Open delete. Paste it right there. Before we work on anything else here, let me stop this and I will work on page model. I can copy what I have for the edit model. If you do copy and paste, make sure to change the class name to be delete model. It must exactly match, or else things will not work because the binding will not work. Here it is looking for that delete model. So we have that. Add the using statement and the constructor name delete model. When we are deleting, we will have to find that, but on the post here, we first have to retrieve that category and then delete. So let me copy that from the controller rather than typing it all over right here. Copy that and I will paste it right here. Perfect, that looks good. Let me validate. The ID, we will get that from category.id here. If that is null, we return not found, else we remove and save the changes. Perfect, we have redirect to page. That also looks good. Let me save that. And now we will fix the delete UI. Let me minimize the web project. Perfect. Everything will be inside category.id. So category dot, I will append that. And we need the ASP page here, which will be categories /index. Great. With that, let me see if everything is functional. Category. Let me try edit again. 333. Let me try delete here. That works. So our CRUD functionalities are working. Now for the next assignment, I want you guys to complete the toaster notification and implement the partial view. So good luck with that, and we will complete that in the next video. Finally, we have to add toaster in our project. That will be straightforward to what we did with MVC as well. So we go here, we have the partial view, copy that, and we will create the same partial view inside Razor project, shared, add Razor page, and we will call that underscore notification. Right here you see it added the page and model, but that is not needed with partial view. We can delete the .cs file and remove all the code, paste what we copied from the MVC project. We need to add this to our underscore layout, so let me do that before render body here. That looks good. In underscore layout, we also need to add toaster URL, so let me copy that from here. We will close the MVC project and add that here. Perfect. So toaster is added. Now we need to configure, or rather set, temp data on the post handlers. For that, let me make sure we are in the Razor project. In the create, before we redirect, we will set temp data of success, category created successfully, delete, category deleted successfully, edit will be category updated successfully, and that looks good. Let me run and see if that works. Go to category here, try to edit history, and perfect. We see the notification. Let me update that back here. And if we delete test2, perfect. All the toaster notification and everything is working as expected. Now with this, we have quickly learned CRUD operations on both MVC and Razor pages. The reason I introduced you Razor pages is moving forward when we add identity using the .NET Identity class library that is built on top of Razor pages. So when you have to edit the page, you know that Razor page will have a page model where you will have get and post handler. With the practice that you have in this section with Razor pages, you should be able to update everything with the identity pages that we will cover in the later sections of the course. Now the Razor project that we implemented was only for learning purpose. We do not want that in our main project for bulky, so let me remove that project here. And perfect, it is no longer there. And in the bulky, let me create more project. Typically, when we are working with a real world project, we do not like to cluster everything together. Like right now, you can see we have the data here, we have all the models here. If we have any constants, we will add them here. But in a real world application, it is best to keep everything separate in its own project. So we will be creating class projects in solution, select a new project, and we will search for class library. First one that we want to create will be bulky.dataAccess. This project will have everything related to database. Like we have the DB context, we will move that in the data access along with the migrations. So let me select that with the .NET Framework. Perfect. Next one, let me create the same class library here, and that one will be bulky. Let me make sure the name, yep, it will be bulky dot, and then we will move all the models in its own project. Select that and create. Finally, I want to add one more project, which will be bulky.utility. For all the utilities that we will add in our project, like email functionality or maybe constants for our application, we will have all of them in the utility project. Let me create that project as well, and I will remove all the class files. We will be creating new class files when needed, but perfect. Now back to the MVC project, we have the bulky web, bulky utility, bulky models, and bulky data access. In the next video, let me remove all the logic that is bundled in the bulky web to the individual class libraries. Before we work on anything else, I want to modify the basic designs that we have or the Bootstrap theme that is being used in the course. We are using Bootswatch for our project, and if we take a look at the themes, that are multiple themes that are available, what I want to do is switch from the Lux theme to the Sandstone here, and doing that is super simple. We can download the Bootstrap file here, and let me open that. We will copy everything here. Let's go back to our project here, and www root.css, well, we updated that directly in the CSS here. We have the Lux theme. Let me remove that and paste the new theme right here, which is Sandstone. With that, if I run the application, you will see the new theme in action. But on top of that, I want to change the button colors that we have by default. Now, rather than typing all of that HTML and CSS, what I have done is I have provided all the snippets, and you can download them from .NETmastery.com. There, if you go to course detail, you can get all the snippets. So make sure to download all of them, and in the attachments, we are in section 4, we have site.css inside there. If you open that, there is quite a few CSS right here, but mainly what I'm doing is changing the BTN outline, the BG success, and main Bootstrap classes that we are using, like BTN primary and BTN success. So copy all of that here. We will go to our solution. We have a site.css. Inside our CSS folder, delete everything that is there and paste all the classes. Now I am not introducing custom classes. I am basically overwriting the classes that are there in Bootstrap. So that way we will not be using new classes. We will be using the old classes, and it is like a Bootswatch theme, and perfect. With that, you can see new design is in effect, and we have a nice color palette right here. I like this color palette more than what we had before. And I also want to change some designing with the create category and all the other pages. Let me do that real quick. So we will go to create category. We will go to views, category, create. Right here, let me start fresh. We will add a div, give it a class of card and shadow. Along with that, we will say border 0 and margin top of 4. Inside the main card here, we will add another div, which will be for card header. And let me add the closing div. Perfect, that looks good. Then we will add the header here. Inside the class of row, we will set div class column 12 text center, and in the h2 we have create category. Let me cut that, paste it here, and give it the class of text white and padding y of 2. After that, when the card header ends here, we will add another div for the card body. So bootstrap classes card body here and padding 4. Perfect. Let me cut the form and paste it right here. Inside the form, let me give it a bootstrap class of row and see how the UI looks right now. I do not see the site.css coming into picture, so let me see underscore layout. We have site.css after the bootstrap, so that should work. But let me move it at the very end here and let me restart the project. Let's go to category and create new category. Perfect. This looks much better. Exactly what I want. Let me go back again, and I do not want the HR here. Remove the first row as well, and I do not need the margin top 4 as well. Where we have the class margin bottom 3 and row, we already are inside row in form. So what I can do is add a class of form floating, padding y2 and column 12. Where we have the input element, I will modify the class from padding 0 to form control, border 0 and shadow. And where we have the input element, I will say ms2. That looks good. Let me copy the classes and apply them for display order as well. Again, all of them are bootstrap classes, nothing fancy. Rather than btn secondary, let me do btn outline primary. Let me save that and let's see the difference now. The hot reload for some reason is not working. You can see it is not checked again for some reason. So let me restart. Perfect, it is checked now. Category, and let me go to create category. And great, the category name looks good here, but something is off. Let me go back. When we use the form floating here, the input will come first, and that will have all of these classes. So let me switch that around. I added them to label by mistake, and perfect. We can copy and paste it here, modify the ASP4 to be display order. We will have to rebuild. Let me do that. Category, create, and perfect. Category name looks good. Let me see, something is off with the display order. We do not have the form floating. Add that here and it will refresh. And perfect. That looks good. So with the row here, let me add padding top 2. And that looks much better for the create category. Let me apply all of these changes to the other pages in the next video. Now that we have the create page that is looking great, Let me apply the same style on the other pages. It is pretty simple. Where we have the form here, let me delete that for a second, and this will be kind of a template that we want. So copy that and then bring back the form by pressing Ctrl Z or undo the changes here. Create is back to what it was. Let's work on delete. We will paste what we copied here and we will cut the form, paste it right here. Do the same for edit as well, but I think I copied the wrong div, so I'll have to copy this again. Go to edit, copy this, paste it again, and let me zoom in, cut this, and we will paste it within the card body. Perfect. Let me run the application and see. We also have to make them floating, so I can copy this div here, go to delete, paste it right here. Whoops, what happened? It pasted the wrong thing. Let me copy and delete, paste it here. We do not need validation, and this will be disabled. Let me copy this and paste it again for display order. Perfect, that looks good. Go to create, copy that once again, and modify the edit here. Paste that 2 times. Name and display order. Let me switch back to the project. It's already running and we have hot reload. So let's go to create. Well, create is done. Let me try edit. That looks much better. I need some margin here. Margin top 3. In delete as well. And let's see. Perfect. Looks good. We do not need the edit category. Let's remove that. Well, let me change it first and remove that row. Edit as well. And perfect. Let's wait for the hot reload. Great. Delete. That also looks perfect. Finally, let me modify the category list here. Let me switch back here where we have the index here. Go to my notepad, copy the template, paste it right here. And I do not think I need the container here, but let me cut everything else here and paste it in the card body. Let's go back and see. Looks much better. We do not need the category list anymore. Remove that. No padding here. And let's see. Well, I'll take the padding bottom here. And let me see. Perfect. That looks much better. The heading here will be category list. And that looks good. We have multiple projects in our solution, but right now everything is bundled inside Bulky Web project. We want to move that from Bulky Web to the individual projects, so let me do that. We will move the data folder to data access. That project will be responsible for all the data related operation. Once we move that, make sure to delete the data folder here. Then we have models that we will move inside the models project, and we will delete the models folder from Bulky Web. Finally, in the utility here, let me add a new class, and I will call that SD for static details. This will be a public static class, and there we will have all the constants for our website. Perfect. And when we are working with data here, we have migrations. That also we will move inside the data access, and we will delete migrations from bulky web. Because we moved quite a few things in the data access project, we need the NuGet packages related to Entity Framework Core inside data access. If you open application DB context, you can see we have all the errors here. If you press Ctrl dot here, typically it does show you the package that needs to be installed, but it is not displaying that. So I can right click, manage NuGet package here. And right now when you click on the project, it will display that project, but you can click on the solution here. And if you click manage NuGet package, it will display all the packages for the solution. So Entity Framework Core, we can install that in data access. Next, we need the tools package as well. And I believe that should be sufficient. Let's go back. And perfect, the errors went away. If we examine the dependencies, packages, we have those two. That looks good. Let me examine if migrations have any error. Nope, that looks good. We need the SQL Server here as well. So let me add that. Manage packages for solution and SQL Server. Perfect, that looks good. Now we have more errors with the models because the namespace have been updated. Well, technically they have not been updated, but I will update them. If I open application DB context, you can see it is inside bulky web. That is not true. Now it should be bulky.data access, and then we have the data. So let me copy that here, and I will modify the migrations as well. Let's do that. And perfect, that looks good. This bulky web will be data access as well. And great, I believe that looks good here. Let me save everything. And the models here will be different as well. That will be bulky.models. But bulky.models is not accessible here. So we will have to right click here, add project reference, and we want to add models and utility project. With that, if you press Ctrl dot here, perfect. We now have the bulky web.models, and let me try to build only the data access right now. And let's see if that works. And we have few errors right here. Migration could not be found. Let me press Ctrl dot here, and we have to install the NuGet package. Let's do that. We do not have the data here. We need the updated statement, and that looks good. Let me try to build that once again. Perfect. We have the same issue here. Add the using statement. And let me try that once again. There are few errors with the seed category table, but let me worry about that later on. Let me close everything right now, and we have to change the namespace in the models project as well. This will be bulky.models.models, but rather than that, let me move it directly in the models here. And that way, it will be directly bulky.models. And perfect. Both of them looks good here. Save that. If I build this, it should work. Perfect. Utility project is also fine. Now let's try the data access, rebuild that one. And we have the models error here. Fix that with the using statement. And then finally we'll get back to the elephant in the room, which are these two error message. Now I want you to pause the video and try to find out on what is going on here. If you Google, you will not find that, but you need to focus something with the files that are open right here. I hope you were able to figure that out. Basically, when you see migration, they have the designer file and the .cs file. Namespace, we updated that in the .cs file, but not in the designer file. That is why we have these issue. So here we have to change that to be bulky.dataaccess.migration, and then the error goes away. We will have to do that in both the places here. That way it will link the CS file and the designer file. And now if we build the data access, that works. So perfect. Our data access, models, and utility are working. Let me close all here. So now for the bulky web, let me run the project here and it will automatically display all the error message. There we go. Let me handle them one by one. We need to remove the old namespace, press Ctrl dot, and we will have to add reference to the other project, data access, and models. Perfect, that worked. Let's see the other one. Next, we have the category. The other errors are inside the views, so we will fix that later. We have one in program.cs. I can handle that one. And we need to go to views to fix the other errors. Perfect. So view, we have the error, and here we have the error view model. Now rather than writing everywhere here like bulky.models.errorViewModel, what we can do is we can add this bulky.models in the global using statement for the bulky web project. That we will do inside the view imports file. So here we can say using, we have the bulky.models, and once we save that, this using statement will be available for all the views right here. So then we no longer have to add this particular line, and you can see error view model is being readable. Let me build it once again. We should see fewer errors because we added the global model statement, and great, all the errors have been resolved. So even though it was a lengthy video, I did not want to implement the entire architecture from the beginning. It would have been simpler for sure. But many times what happens is you start simple and then as the complexity grows, you separate things out. Everything that we did in this video will give you some practice on how to separate things out if it is needed in your project. With that configured, let me run the project and see if everything is working as expected. Perfect. We have the create, edit, and all the pages are loading as expected. But now our application is much cleaner. We have multiple projects in our solution. When you are working with Entity Framework Core and you are just getting started, it is very common that you might run into some issues with a migration and some things might not work based on what you expect, and migrations are something that are very easy to be corrupted if you do not pay attention. You can always roll back a migration, you can make more changes, create a model, add new migration. But for some reason, if everything is corrupt and you want to start fresh while learning, how do you do that? Doing that is pretty simple. So let me show you how to do that in this video. First thing, we will go to SQL Server here and everything is corrupt. So we will delete the database, which is bulky right here. Let's delete that. Next, we will go back here. Inside the data access, we have migrations. Now our migrations are corrupt and we want to start fresh. you can delete the migrations altogether. Perfect. Now there are no migrations, there is no database. To start fresh, you can go to Tools, Package Manager, Console, and add a new migration. We know right now we are only adding the category model, so we can say add category to DB, and we are also seeding the category table. So we will say add category to DB and seed table. Now when you execute this, you will see an error message. And there you go. The target project is Bulky Web. Now we have moved our data to a data access project, so the default project must be updated to data access. So default project will be data access and the default startup project is Bulky Web. With that configured, if I run this, it will add migration. Now right now there were no previous migration, so what it will do is it will identify all the changes that it has to push to a new database. It has to create categories table, it has to insert data, and that is all we have right now. With that configured, we can hit the command update database and our database will be populated. Perfect. If we go back and refresh the database here, we have bulky, tables, and we should have categories populated. Great. So the only disadvantage this time is if you have added some new categories, those will not be available because we are starting fresh. But basically anytime in the video, if your migrations are corrupt and you don't know how to reset your database, this is the video that you should look for. In this short video, we will see the different service lifetimes when it comes to dependency injection in .NET Core. Now you do not have to program this along with me. I just want you guys to watch the next 10 minutes and understand what are the different service lifetimes in dependency injection. Before we take a look at any example, let me quickly give you a rough idea on what each lifetime is responsible for. Transient lifetime is the simplest one among all of them, and it is also one of the safest one. Transient basically means that whenever we want any implementation, create a new object and give that new object. You never have to reuse an existing object. Every time a service is requested, a new implementation is created. After that, we have the scoped, where it depends on the HTTP request. So whenever an HTTP request is sent to the server, that time for that scope, one lifetime will be created. And then the same object or same service is used wherever in that request the service is requested. So let's say for one single page load, we are calling a service 10 times. It will only create that object one time and it will use that same object 10 times in that one request. But then if a next request comes in, then a new implementation is created. And finally, we have singleton, where one implementation is created for the lifetime of the application. So once the application starts, we create an object of that service or an implementation, and that is used for all the upcoming requests unless you restart the application. So to give you a rough idea again, transient, new service is created every single time. For scoped, new service will be created once per request, and for singleton, new service will be created once per application lifetime. Now scoped is one of the most recommended approach for web application. Because of that, a service will be created on each request. But even with all of these overview, things might be a little complicated. So let me explain that little more with a real-world example. Let me switch to Visual Studio and we will be creating an MVC application. I will give it a name of DI Service Lifetime and let me create that. In the project here, Let me create a new folder for services. In there, let me create 3 interfaces for the 3 services that we have. So the first one will be iScoped. Let me add a new one here. That will be Singleton. And finally, we will be adding the transient. These are just the interface name. We have not added any functionality. In there, let me add a method, getGuid, which will return a random guid. So the return type will be string. Perfect. I will add that in all the 3 interfaces that we added. Now we need to add implementation of these 3 interfaces. Implementation will be pretty simple. Let me add a class here for the Singleton Guid service. That will implement the iSingleton Guid service. Implement the interface. Here let me create a private read-only guid with the name of ID, and in the constructor ID we will say guid.newGuid. In the function here we just want to return ID.toString. That looks good. Let me create the same implementation for the other 2 interfaces that we have. Let me add a class which will be scoped guid service, and that will implement the iScoped guid service. I can copy everything here, paste it, and we will change the constructor name. Looks good. Let me add the last one, which is transient guid service. Let me copy and paste it in here. And this will implement the iTransient Guid service. So now we have 3 interfaces and their corresponding 3 implementation. That looks good. But when we register these services to program.cs, we have to write the lifecycle to which we want to register. So in the add service here, we will say builder.services.add. And then we have to write what lifecycle we want to use. We have scoped, transient, and singleton. In singleton, we will have the interface which is iSingleton Guid service, and implementation is inside the singleton Guid service. That is how we register a service to the dependency injection container. We will also register the transient and scoped service. Perfect. So it is exactly same like if we were registering DB context to the container, and then when we have to use that, we will do that inside the home controller. Before we start using that, right here, let me create 6 private fields. 2 will be for the scoped service, 2 for singleton, and 2 for transient. We have scoped 12, singleton 12, and transient 12. Next, what we want is implementation of this interface. We registered that in program.cs right here. So basically we are saying that when someone asks for an implementation of iSingleton Guid service, we are telling the .NET framework that provide them the implementation that is there in the Singleton Guid service. But there we are telling that use the add singleton, that is the lifetime. So when we want to use the implementation inside the constructor here, we can directly ask .NET Core that we need the implementation of iScoped Guid service, and we will call that as scoped guid. Then we want another implementation of that, so scoped guid 1, we will have scoped guid 2, and similarly we want the implementation for singleton and transient service. So these are the implementation that .NET Framework will provide based on what we registered in program.cs. Then we have to assign these implementation to the local variable that we have right here. For that we will say underscore singleton1 is equal to singleton1, and same for everything else. I can change this to be scoped1 rather than scoped guid here. Perfect. Looks good. So we have this implementation. On there we can call the method which is getGuid. Rather than making anything fancy, let me use a string builder for messages here, and I will append to that message using string interpolation. So first I will say transient1, and then we will display the value using underscore transient1 dot getGuid. We have that method, and after that let me add a new line. So perfect, that looks good. For the first transient, copy and paste that once again. We want to display the transient2.getGuid, and let me add one more new line there. Copy these, paste it 2 more times. Next we want the scoped1, scoped2, underscore scoped1, underscore scoped2, and finally we need singleton. Perfect. When we return back, we do not want to return back to a view. We just want to return OK and display the message .toString on the screen. So now we need to think about what will happen. All of them have basically the same getGuid method, which returns a random GUID. But the only thing that is different is on how the lifecycle have been registered. So let me run this and see that in action. And perfect, we have something right here. You can see when we are working with the transient request here, the GUIDs are different. But when we have scoped or singleton, they are the same. As we know, singleton stays same for the life cycle of the application. So even when we refresh the application, scope and transient will be different, but singleton will always stay the same. You can see when I am refreshing here, transient is getting updated along with scoped, but singleton always stays the same. And then for scoped here, you can see every time for a single request, it gets a new value, but for one request, the value stays the same in both of them. But in transient, for any time a GUID is requested, it calls a new GUID. So that means every time when a transient is called, it basically gives a new implementation of that service. When it comes to scoped, the implementation stays same for one request. If in that one request we are calling this 10 times, we will get the same service. But for the next time, it will get you a different service when you are working with scoped. So with that, you can see how transient, scoped, and singleton are different when it comes to dependency injection service lifetime. Now we want to work on repository pattern. But when we are working with this, if things are confusing, do not worry. By the end of this section, everything will make much more sense, but stick with me and I will explain you everything that we are doing here. Let me close everything. Inside the data project, we have the data access. There we will be creating a new folder that will hold all the repository. We will have a repository folder, and in that folder, we will have the interface for that, which is iRepository. Repository interface that we will be creating will be a generic interface. So we will create an interface here, and I will call that iRepository.cs. Perfect. Now typically when we are working with generic, we do not know what the class type will be. So I will call that it will be a generic class T, and we will say where T will be a class. So when the iRepository will be implemented, at that time we will know on what class the implementation will be. Because right now we have category on which we want to implement repository. Down the road we will have product and many other tables like order header, order detail, and because of that we are making this generic here. Then we need to think about what will be all of the methods that we want right now. Now, of course, I do not expect you to think about all of them, but basically what will be the basic ones, and then if we have to update our repository, we will of course do that as we proceed with the course. So here, first thing that I will comment, T will be category or any other generic model on which we want to perform the CRUD operation, or rather we want to interact with the DB context. For an example, I have written that T will be category, and then think about what will be all the operations that we need right now when we are performing the CRUD operations on category. The first one that I can think of is we need to retrieve all the category where we are displaying all of them. So we can say the return type will be IEnumerable of T, and we can call that method as getAll. The one after that will be if we have to retrieve only one category, because many times, like on the edit page, we have to retrieve the details of one category and then we have to pass that or display that on the screen. So in that case, the return type will be a single category, and let me call that function getFirst or default. Now you can call this as get as well if you want. I like to call it getFirst or default. That way I'm a little bit more explicit. But if you only want to call that get, that is also fine. And then name of the function, we can call that get because we are fetching only one of them, and that's fine here. What will be the parameter? Now if you examine what we are doing in the controller, category controller, where we have to retrieve one category in edit, you can see there are multiple ways to do that. We can use find, we can use first or default. We will be using the first or default approach, but there we need something special. We need a link operation. The reason we will not be using find is that only works on the ID. But if you want some other condition to get one record, you can pass that using link operator. So basically in parameter we will be getting a link operation like this. How do you write that here? For that we have something called as an expression, and there we will say function type will be t, boolean. So what we will be getting will be a function and the out result will be a boolean. We can call that as filter when we are fetching an individual record. Now do not try to spend too much time on why I have to write it exactly like this. You can think of that when you want to write a link expression that we have in first or default. This is the general syntax for that. So perfect, we have getAll and we have getIndividual. Then we have to create a category, remove a category, and sometimes it is possible you want to remove multiple categories in one single call. So we will say void here, we will have an add method where we have to pass the object that needs to be added. We have an update as well, and we have a delete. Then I also want something called as delete range, which will delete multiple entities in a single call. The parameter here, we will receive an IEnumerable or a collection of entities. Rather than delete, I like to use remove, so let me make them remove and remove range. Now if you remember, when we were working with EF Core and we were updating or adding anything, we always had to call the save changes. When we work with repository pattern, we do not like the update or add method directly inside the generic repository. The reason is simple. When you are updating a category, logic might be different than what you are doing when you are updating a product. With EF Core, you only use the update statement, so it could be same as well. But typically I have seen that update is more complicated because sometimes you only want to update few properties or you have some other logic. Because of that, I like to keep the update and save changes out of the repository, and when we will implement like category repository will implement the generic repository, on there we will have the update and save method. So in the generic repository we will only have add and not update. We will have add, remove and remove range. Perfect. With that we have the generic repository and interface is looking good. We still need to implement this interface. Let me do that in the next video. Now we are getting into the fun part of implementing our repository. So in the repository folder, I will add a class, call that repository, and that will implement the iRepository. I will make that a public class. We need to implement the interface here, and it's not finding that. Maybe it's internal. Change that to be public here. If I press Ctrl dot, I am facing some issue here, and the reason is because I have repository and iRepository. If you want, you can rename that, but I will add the using statement for bulky.dataaccess.repository.iRepository. With that, we will get the iRepository, but one thing that we have to define in iRepository is what is the class. Right now also we are working with generic here, so we will say T where T is class. And with that the repository class is implementing iRepository. If you press Ctrl dot, we have the implement interface. When we are adding the generic here, we need to make the class generic as well, and perfect, that works. With that we have all the methods right here. Let's implement that. When we were adding an entity, we used to add that on _db.add, and then we used to add the entity. So we will need that using dependency injection. I will have the private read-only application DB context, and in the constructor we will get application DB context and assign that right here. But now one thing will be different. Previously when we were working on something, we had _db.categories and then we had add. But right now we don't know that, and here we cannot use the generic like this. So we cannot say db.t because it does not know what that stands for. We want to make sure we use generic, that way we can access the DB set directly. So right here, I can create an internal DB set on the generic type T and call that as DB set. Then we can say this .db set is equal to _db dot. We can set the current one, that is the generic one that we get here, that will be set to the DB set. So when we create this generic class on category, the DB set will be set to categories. So in simple words, where we have _db.categories, this will be equivalent to the DB set that we have. So when we were saying _db.categories.add and we were passing some entity here, now all we have to say is dbset.add. I hope that makes sense here. So where we have the add, we will say _dbset.add and we have the entity. That way we are able to use the DB set and it will be generic based on the type repository here is implemented. So perfect, add looks good here. Next, what we have here, let me remove this and add a using statement. It is much cleaner. We have the individual get. And for that we will be working on an iQueryable of T. We will call that query and we will assign the complete DB set here. So basically right now we have the complete DB set that we have assigned here. Then on the query we can apply a where condition and I can pass the filter. Whatever we get here, we will assign that back to the query. So that way, whatever condition we have, it will apply that on a where condition and it will have the query ready for that. Now get must always return one entity. So when we return back, we can say from query, we want the first or default. What we did here is exactly same that I had in the comment right here. First on the DB set, we have the where condition, and then we are getting the first or default from that record. That is the logic that we have implemented right here. Then we have the get all. We can copy the iQueryable there, and we can return back query.toList. Because DB set will basically have all the records like categories in our example, we have to convert that and return back. Finally, we have remove, that is on DB set we have remove, and we can pass the entity. Similar to remove, we also have a built-in method which is remove range. Let me add that, and that is also inside EF core. That remove range expects an IEnumerable, and it will remove all of those categories that are passed to the IEnumerable. So perfect. With that, our repository interface has been implemented, and this looks much cleaner. Let me continue from the next video. Now we have a repository and we have an interface iRepository. We need our category to implement that repository. So how do we do that? In the iRepository, first I will create a new interface. That will be iCategory repository. We will make this a public interface, and that interface will implement the iRepository interface. And this time when it implements the iRepository, we know what is the class on which we want the implementation for this repository. That will be the category model where we want to implement the interface. That way we are actually defining now that when we need the implementation for iCategory repository, I want you to get the base functionality from repository. What that will do is that will make sure we have all of these base methods where entity will be category. On top of that, if you remember, we needed two more functionality, and those were update and save methods. So here we will have void update. There we will get the category, and let me call that obj, and we will also have a method to save the changes. So this is the final category repository interface that will implement the base functionality that we have for all the repository, plus we will have an update and save for the category repository. Now this is the interface. We need to have its implementation in the category repository. Let me do that in the next video. We created the interface for category repository. Let me add the implementation for that in repository. Create a class which will be category repository. It will be a public class, and that will implement the iCategory repository. If we press Ctrl dot here, it will implement the interface. But when you see it implements, it is actually implementing the add, get all, remove range. Those implementation we already have in our generic repository. So we do not want to add that again. We want to use the base functionality. Because of that, along with the iCategory repository, we also want to implement the repository with the class of category, and that will come before the interface like this. With that, you can see it does not give the error message for the iCategory repository or other methods. But now we have one error here which says there is no argument that corresponds to the required parameter DB of repository category. Well, if we go to the repository implementation here, we are saying that application DB context will be provided to you when the object will be created. Typically, when we use dependency injection, they are automatically injected. But in this case, we are creating on line 12. So what we can say is, hey, for category repository, we want to get that application DB context using dependency injection. And then we can add a constructor, get that here. And when we get this implementation, we want to pass this implementation to all the base class. So here we can say base DB. That way, whatever DB context we get here, we will pass to the repository and the error goes away. The two methods that we have here are pretty simple. When we have to save, we save that on _db.savechanges. And when we have to update the category, we will say _db.categories.update and we pass the object. Perfect. So now we have a category repository that has been implemented. How can we replace the application DB context that we are using here with our actual repository? Let me show you that in the next video. We have the category controller where we were using application DB context, but now we do not have to use this directly. We can access the category repository. How will we do that? Rather than application DB context, we will say that we want an implementation of category repository and we are asking dependency injection to provide that implementation. Then on the _db, we have all the helper methods that we have created. Well, rather than _db, it makes sense to call this category repository. That way it makes more sense when we are consuming that. Perfect. So when we have to retrieve everything, we have _category repo.get all. We created that. Scroll down. Where we had to create, we had the _cat repo.add method. And when we have to save the changes, we will say _cat repo.save. Great, that looks good. Let me scroll down further. When we had to retrieve the category for edit, we will go to _category repo. We have the get, and we will pass the link operator u goes to u.id is equal to the ID. That way we are using category repository here. Next we have update. Let me copy what we have for add here, paste it right here, and we have update. That looks good. We have the find again. Let's copy the edit one, paste it here, and we have the find again, paste it right there, and we have the _category repo.remove and save changes. Perfect. So you can see with this we have our repository in place. If we save everything, we no longer have application DB context right here. When we run the application, we will run into an error message. I want to show you because this is a common error message many times. You can see I click on category and it says unable to resolve for type iCategory repository while attempting to activate the category controller. Whenever you see unable to resolve service for type, the first thing you should think about is there is some issue when registering that service to the container. Because here you are asking dependency injection to provide an implementation of the iCategory repository. But have you even registered that service in the dependency injection container? We have not. So that is one thing that you should always remember. If there is any service, you have to register that to dependency injection. Now what will be the lifetime? Typically scoped is the most common one, and that should be used so that for one request it will use the same service. So here we have the interface as iCategory repository and implementation is in category repository. Add the using statement there and perfect. Now we have added the category repository in the dependency injection. So in controller, when we want the implementation, the program knows that I have to give the implementation of category repository. Let me run this and everything will work exactly the same like it used to with application DB context. We can see all the categories here. If I try to create one, that worked. I can delete that. And perfect. All the CRUD operations are working, but now we are doing that with our repository. In the last video, you saw we were able to perform all the CRUD operations on category using our repository. But before the last video and current video, something has changed on my machine. And what I mean by that is if I go back and examine the appsettings.json file, you remember the server name was a dot. Now if I go here and if I connect using dot, it does not work. Well, I had to reset my laptop for some reason, and because of that, I encountered this issue. So now what is the solution? The localDB /MS SQL localDB, I'm able to connect to that particular server. For that, I can press the connect icon here and copy this, and we will update that inside the server right here. If we examine that, you can see rather than 1//, it automatically added 2//. And that looks good. But now you might be wondering that, hey, we had our migration, we had our data inside the database. What happens to all of that? Well, because we are using Entity Framework Core, things are super simple. We do not have a bulky database here. To create that, inside the package manager console, all we have to write is the command update database. We do not have to add any migration. We only have to update database because all the migration are already present in our code. With that one line, if I run the application now, everything should work the same. You can see category, and we have the 3 categories that we were seeding our database with. With that, I want you to analyze the importance of migrations and how easy it is to get started with a project. For an example, if a new developer had to set up this code on their laptop, they just have to clone the repository and press the command update database. Right now it is a local SQL server, but if it was Azure SQL, then they just have to run the command update database and the code should work automatically on their machine. And that reminds me of my good old days when I had to spend almost a day to set up a code on my machine. Because back then we had many dependencies and we had to handle all of them. But with Entity Framework Core, you can see if a database is different, it does not take much time. We only have to update connection string, run the command update database, migrations get pushed automatically, and we are up and running. So I wanted to quickly show you on how you can easily update connection string and again bring your project with all the categories. The next item that I want to show you guys, you do not have to do that, but I want to show you how that could be done. And what I am talking about is sometimes you might face a situation where you have to rename your project. Like let's say where we have bulky in the project names here, we want to modify all of them to be bulky book. So how do we do that? Well, it is pretty simple, but there are some things that we will have to modify. First, wherever we have bulky here, we will change the project name to be bulky book here, and when I do that, we will see an error message. Now typically you will not see this error message, but the reason I am seeing that is previously I tried to rename that, and because of that a .user already exists at this location. So for that, what we will do is right click and let me open that folder. Inside there we have the bulky book web user. We will delete that, and then if I try to rename here, it will work. Now again, we don't want the bulky user, we want bulky book web, and perfect. So again, point number 1, you will not see that error message, but I wanted to explicitly show that because of that I introduced that user. Then we have to rename all the project here. Let me do that. bulkybook.utility, bulkybook.models, and we have bulkybook.dataaccess. Right now we have renamed only the project, but all the files like the controller here, you can see namespace is using bulky web. In order to change all of that, we will do Ctrl+Shift+F, find and replace. Wherever we see bulky, we want to replace that with bulky book, and let me replace all. Perfect, that works. But now if you notice the controller, the namespace is modified here, but the repository and everything, you can see it is not detecting those projects. Well, sometimes it might happen that it detects that project. It all depends on the dependencies here. I am not able to open the dependencies, so let me restart Visual Studio. Once I do that, it will reload everything, and perfect. Now in dependencies, when you examine project, it has bulkybook.dataaccess, and it is working as expected. But you can see the models here is not working. So if we examine the dependencies in the data project, you can see the name here is messed up because we renamed a few things. Changing that is super simple. Edit project file. We will remove both the dependencies here, and we will add the project reference once again to models and utility. Perfect. With that, everything should be fixed here. Let me build the solution, and great, that worked. Finally, let me run the application and show you something odd. And great, right now you can see everything is working as expected. But for some of you, the footer here will not be properly designed. And let me show you how it will look like if we go to views, shared_layout. Let me break the CSS, and perfect. So this is exactly how it will look like. You might be wondering that, hey, what exactly is this CSS and why is it present? Well, what happens is there is automatically localization and bundling that is being done with the CSS. This has been introduced with .NET 6. If you examine the _layout.cshtml, there is a .css file, and it is automatically scoped to _layout. In order for this to be automatically added to CSS, inside the link here, we need the href with the project name .style.css. That is the CSS isolation that has been introduced, and I wanted to show that as well. So once that matches, it automatically binds that, and you can see the footer is functional as expected. But if you go to category here, things again will not work. You can see the exception here, and that is because knowingly or unknowingly we have also updated the database name to be bulky book. This has to be bulky we did not intend to update the database name. With the Ctrl+Shift+F, when we updated, it updated the database name as well. Because of that, the connection was broken, and when we modified back, everything is working as expected. So even though we have spent about 10 minutes on this video, we have learned some things important. First, we saw the CSS isolation that comes with the styling here, and next we saw how can we modify the project name, and if we modify some dependencies gets broken, how can we fix that and make sure our project is working as expected. Now traditionally in a programming course you will not see these common issues, but when you are working with a real world project, I myself have encountered these issues, and that is why I wanted to spend some time to give you exposure to these issues and how to resolve them. I hope this video was helpful, and let me continue with the course from the next video. Now in our project, we have category repository, and that is handling the CRUD operations for category. Category repository looks good, but it is not perfect. And what I mean by that is, let me go to controller here, and let's think that in a controller you have many action methods and you are using about 10 different repositories. You will have to inject all of them. That is completely okay. That actually gives you the freedom that hey, you only inject the repository that is needed. But one drawback here is if you go to repository, and if we go to category repository, we have the save method. Now this save method will be there in all the individual repositories that we will have down the road, like product, order, shopping cart, and everyone else. But the save functionality is not relevant to the repository or the model. It is a global method that is being used. So the correct way of doing things is to have this save in something called as unit of work. But before I implement that, I do want to tell you that if you only want to use the category repository in a project, that is completely okay. Adding a unit of work is not always required. I like that personally because it gives a clean approach, but with that there are some drawbacks as well, which I will cover as we proceed with the course. But before that, we have the big question on how will we have the unit of work. Inside the I repository here, let me add a new item. Let me stop the project first, right click, add a new item. And with the new version of Visual Studio, they have implemented a compact view. I do like that when I have to add the CSS file, but for interface, we can click Show All Templates here, Interface, and rename that to be I Unit of Work. Let's add that, and we will make this a public interface. In here, we will have all the repositories, so I category repository, and we will only have the get inside there. Next, we can implement the global method here, like save. Now the implementation of how we will get the category repository, that will be done in repository folder. We will create, I can use the compact view, I need only the class file. I will call that unit of work. This will be a public class and it will implement the I unit of work interface. We will press Ctrl dot and implement the interface. Perfect. We need an implementation for the category repository here. Let me add a getter and a private setter right there. Now, like in the category repository, we had application DB context using dependency injection. We will do the same thing, and that will be done in unit of work right here. We will have the class name as unit of work here, and we do not have any base class. We can remove that. Right here, where we have the category repository, we can add that in the constructor. Let me cut and paste it here. I will call that category, and we will say category is equal to new category repository, and we will pass the DB context right there. And we have an error here because in interface we called that category repository. We change that to category here, and perfect, the error goes away. So now in unit of work we have something for category repository where we are passing the DB context as well. Lastly, let me modify the save here, cut that and paste the implementation here, and we do not need the save method inside the individual repository. I'll have to remove that from the interface as well. And perfect, looks good. So with that, our unit of work looks good and it has the implementation for category repository. Let me close both the files here, and in the next video, let me work on category controller, not the repository. I closed that accidentally. We have category controller. Here, we do not want to use the category repository. We want to use the unit of work that we configured because it internally has category repository as well. Now we have to replace the category repository with unit of work in the web project. First, we will go to program.cs and we will have to register that to dependency injection. We no longer require the category repository. We need unit of work this time. So perfect. We have unit of work, and then unit of work internally creates an object or implementation of category repository. So here we will have unit of work, and let me call that underscore unit of work. We will get that using dependency injection, and we will call that unit of work. And right here underscore unit of work is equal to unit of work. Now in unit of work we have category, and there we have get all. So previously when we were using the category repository, we did not have to access that, but now in unit of work we have to write which object we are working on or which repository we are working on, and then we can do everything like before. I will copy this, paste it in all the places here, and when we have the save, we do not have that in repository. That is directly inside unit of work, so we do not need the repository name. Then in the edit here, we will paste unit of work dot category. Same goes for update. For save, we only have unit of work. Perfect. Let me modify in all the places. And great. That looks good. With that, let me run the project again and see if everything works as expected. Perfect, we are able to get all the category here. Let me try to create one. That works, and delete is also functional. So everything is working as expected, but now we are using the unit of work rather than directly the repository. This gives us one advantage. In unit of work, we will have access to all the repositories that we want. But with that, we have a disadvantage as well. Like in the category controller, we only want category repository. But in unit of work, it will create implementation of all the repositories that are registered, like if we have product, if we have order, or shopping cart. So there are pros and cons in both of them, but personally speaking, I like the unit of work implementation because it is much cleaner. So with that configured, let me continue from the next video. Now I hope you are comfortable with controllers, actions, and we are going to add one more hierarchy on top of that. And the only reason I am showing that is it is actually a great feature if you have to divide few things in your project. And that is called as area. Typically when we work with routing, we have controller and then action method. But .NET team has also provided something special to divide few things in different areas. Like if you have a customer-facing website and admin panel, you can divide your project in those two areas. Now how do you add that in a project? We will right-click on Bulky Book Web here, Add, and we will click New Scaffolded Item. Inside there you can see we have an MVC area. Let's add that, and we need to give area a name. Let's say we have two sections in our website. One is for the admin section, so let me add an area for admin. It will add the NuGet package and scaffold that area. Another area that we will add will be the customer area that will have the code related to customer like homepage, details, and much more. Perfect. Right here, when we scaffold that, you can see it adds a folder with the name of areas. Then it has admin, which is the area that we added. And inside there we have controllers, models, and view. So basically all the code that was previously just in one location, we can now break that down in different areas. But when we add area, you can see the routing here also changes. In the scaffold.txt, it displays that, hey, now you have to add areas in the routing as well. So let me do that. Let me copy this, and we will go to our program.cs. We have the controller route here. Let me paste that here, and we will add a forward slash. So now we need to say what area should be invoked by default. I will call that as customer. We do not have that, so let me add that area as well. And we will call that customer area. And let me add that. Perfect, that looks good. Now with that, we will have to move our controllers inside the area folders. Now in the area, you can see we have folder for data and models, but we have moved that to the individual project, so we do not need these two here. Let me delete that. From both the areas, we will only have controllers and views inside the area folder. Category controller belongs to the admin functionality, so I will move that to the admin controller. Home controller is a customer facing, so I will change that and move that inside the customer area. With that, our default route now is customer area, home controller, and index action. Now when I moved this, the namespace were also updated. But if in your case you selected no and you did not update the namespace, make sure to update that namespace. On top of that, how do you tell a controller that this controller belongs to a specific area? For that, we have the area attribute here, and we need to give the name that category controller is inside the admin area and home controller is inside customer area. With that configured, let me run the project. And things are not working. The constraint customer inside the route option. Let me see what the route option is. And of course, this will be equal to and not a colon. Now we have a more user-friendly exception which says the view was not found. And that is indeed correct because we have moved the controller, but we did not move the corresponding views. So let me go to the views here, category, we will move that inside the admin here, and home, move that to the customer views right here. Once you move that, and if you run the project, things will still not work. Where is the namespace? Let me see. It is inside the category views. And yep, we have the model of category. But how will we know where exactly is this category? If you examine, we had that previously in the view imports, we had that models. So along with that, we also have to move the view start and view import. Both the files, we will paste it inside the view folder in both the areas. Perfect. With that, let me run the project once again. And perfect, the website comes up and everything looks good. But when you click on home and privacy, that is working because both of them are inside the customer area. But category is inside admin area. When you click there, it tries to look for category controller in customer, which does not exist. So we have to modify that. So what will happen is where we have the ASP controller now, we will also have to define ASP area. So category is inside admin and home controller is inside customer. If you do not write the area, it will look for that controller in the existing area where the page is already residing. That looks good. Let me run the project and see if that works. Perfect. Admin category, that works. If you click create new category, it will work because even if you have not defined the area, we are looking inside the same admin area that we are in. So you can see create, back to list, edit, everything is working because we are working in the same area. Now typically moving forward, I will explicitly write all the areas, but for category, I think we are good to skip that because we will always perform CRUD operations from the category index page. But perfect. With that, you can see how areas will add one more layer in navigation. And now when we are working with routing, we will define area first, then controller, and then the action name. Now we have our category, but we will be adding product in the upcoming video where we will be performing CRUD operations. Now before I add that, let me add a drop down in the navigation. So I will go to getbootstrap.com and let me go to the documentation, search for navbar. We have a drop down here that looks good. Let me copy the li here for drop down. Copy that, go back to our code. We have underscore layout open here. If not, you can open that. And after the li elements, let me paste that right here. We go back to the UI, we have hot reload, and that kicks in, but I see a blue color, and I think that is because of the CSS. Yep, I do not need that. I can comment that out, save that, and perfect. Looks good. The first one here, I want that to be category. Cut the li and paste it right here. We will have to rebuild. Let me wait for that. And perfect, we have category, but I do not see the color here. We will have to make that text dark. Save that here. And perfect, we have that. But rather than that, I can just give it a class of dropdown item. And let's see if that works. Perfect, much better. After that, I will leave the divider here. And let's see, that looks good. Rather than drop down here, let me make it content management. And perfect, that looks good. Now we have worked on performing CRUD operations on category. But in our website, we will be selling books, and basically we need product that will contain all of the books of our website, and that will have a category. So we need to create a model for our product, which is book, and perform CRUD operations on that. First thing that we have to do for that is actually create a model. Let me close all the tabs here. We will do that in the bulkybook.models here. Right click, add a new class, and I can call that as product. We will make this a public class, and what will be all the properties of product? If you recall, inside category, we used data annotations and we had the ID as the primary key. We can copy those two, paste that in product here, because we will have ID, and rather than name when we work with a book, we have title. We do not want max length there. This looks good. After that, let me add description, ISBN, and author for our product. Now our store is a bulky store where we will be selling books in bulk. So if they buy more books, they will get more discount. For that, let me add first property, which will be list price. And I will add a display property here, because if you notice here, it has a list price. I want to display that with a space. So for that, we have the display data annotation, and I will call that as list price. And of course, I forgot the name here. That looks good. On top of that, I want a range validation that price must be between, let's say, $1 and $1,000. Looks good for the list price. But our store is a bulky store, so based on the different quantity, we will have different price. Let me paste that 3 times. The first one, let me call that price. Next one, I will call that price 50. And last one will be price 100. Price 100 will be price of the book if they buy more than 100 quantity. Price 50 will be the price for more than 50 quantity. And it will be price for 1 to 50. So list price will be a different price, and price here will be the cost of product for the quantity 1 to 50. If they buy more than 50, then we will give them the price 50. For more than 100, we will give them price 100. Now this looks good for all the properties that we want right now. Of course, we need category inside our product, and we also want to add an image to our product. But we will do that later on. First, I want to keep things super simple. Right now, our model has few strings and few double, kind of similar to what we had for category. And with that in place, I want you guys to practice CRUD operations on product similar to what we did with category, and that will be your next assignment. Let me walk you through that in the next video. We have added the product model to our project. Now we have not added all the properties, but I have added the basic properties for now. Before we add this product table to our database, we will have to add that to application DB context inside the data access. So let me copy this DB set for category, and we will rename that to be product. And the table name, I will call that as products. Now that looks good. On top of that, I want to see the product as well. So let me copy the hash data here, paste it one more time, and then we will have to create new products here. When we seed something, you can write whatever you want, but for consistency, I have provided that inside snippets. If you open the resources and snippet section 6, we have seed products. Let me open that, copy everything, and I will paste that inside the hash data. There I am populating 6 products. And these are all the properties that we have added in the product model, so it should match perfectly. With that configured, now we have the data and we can seed our table. So with that, you can work on your first assignment. Inside there, I want you to push product to the database, and when you create the products table, along with that, all the 6 records will also be created because we added inside the hash data. Once you create the products table, then you have to implement the product repository for data access. You will create the product repository interface and implement that. And after that, you will also add that to unit of work. That is the basic configuration that you have to do for your first assignment. So good luck with that, and we have already done that with the category repository and the category table. All the steps are exactly the same, so I hope you have good practice before we move forward in the next video. I hope you were able to complete the assignment, but if you face any issue, let me do that together in this video. First thing, we have to create our products table in the database. So we have the package manager here. Let me open that and we will add migration. Now when you add migration, if you face error here, like if I just add the migration, add products to DB, this will not work because the default project here is the Bulky Book web project. It should display an error message. Right now we see a different error message, and that is because where we have the hash data, this should be product. I hope you corrected that when you tried the assignment, but with that, let me try adding migration. Of course, we get error message because the default project is web project. When we add a migration, that has to be updated to data access. With that, let me add the migration, and perfect. That looks good. Let me update the database. And great, it completed successfully. If we scroll down here in the migration, it is also seeding the data. So that looks good. Let me switch back to the SQL Server here and examine Bulky, tables, products table. It should have 6 records. And great, that looks good. If we go back to the assignment, our first step is complete here. Next, we need the product repository. For that, we will go and basically we can copy and paste the category repository, rename that to be product repository. We will have to do the same with the interface here. So this will be product repository. Copy that name, and we will make sure to rename our interface. That will be on the product, and in the update we will get a product object. Looks good. Let me go to the product repository here, and we will modify that product repository. Class name will be product repository, and this will be product. Constructor name will be product repository, and in the update we will get the product underscore db dot products dot update. Perfect. Our repository also looks good. Final step, we have to add that to our unit of work. Let me open the interface as well as the implementation. This one will be product repository. We will call that as product. Close the interface here. In the implementation, we will have to add the product repository. Name that as product, and we will say product is equal to new product repository. Pass the application DB context. With that, I believe our unit of work as well as a repository for product is complete. We have unit of work in place for our product repository. It is time for the second assignment, where you have to create product controller and action methods for the CRUD functionality. After you create the controller and action methods, then you will have to create view for all the CRUD operations and add client-side and server-side validation. All of the steps here we have already done that for category controller, so you have to replicate them, and the only reason I am making you replicate them once again is that you will gain some experience on how to work with all the CRUD functionalities with models, views and controller. The only difference this time is that you have more properties in product than category model. So make sure to practice all the CRUD operations, and I will show you how to do that in the next video. I hope you were able to complete all the CRUD operations with product. I do not want you to see me typing everything here. Because of that, what I will do is copy what we have for category and paste that for product and modify that real quick. So let's go back to our code here, where inside the areas here, admin controller, copy and paste the controller, and I will rename that to be product controller. Let me copy that name, and I will modify the class name and the constructor name. Everything else looks good here. Wherever we have category, I will have to replace that with product. So I can do Ctrl+Shift+F, replace in file, and in the current file, I will replace category with product. I will match the case here and replace all. Now here, make sure you are only doing that in the current document. Once you complete that, let's take a look here. Perfect. On unit of work, we are going into product and retrieving all product. Where we have the create, we do not need the custom validation, so I can remove that. And this looks good. Inside the edit get action method, we are retrieving the product here, and rather than category, let me also rename this. So lowercase category, we will rename that to lowercase product in the current document, and that looks good. Perfect. In the edit post here, we are updating. Inside the delete, we are fetching that. Looks good. In the delete post here, we retrieve the product and remove that. So with that, the controller looks great. Now we need to add views for our application. If we go back, we need to create views for the CRUD operation. We already have the views for category. Copy and paste that again. The complete folder, I will rename that to be product. And let me see what we have in index. In all of them, we have to replace category with product. So an easier approach is, let me open all of them here. Close the product controller. We only have the 4 view open here. Ctrl+Shift+F, replace in file. And we will replace that in all the open documents, which are all the views for our product. Replace all. Did not find any with the lowercase. Let me do that with uppercase here. And perfect, that worked. Now we have a different properties inside product. So rather than name, we have title. Let me rename that and paste it 2 times. After title, we have description. Let me modify that and paste it here. I will copy and paste this about 5 more times here. Then we have the ISBN. Let me modify that. Next, we have the author. After that, we have the price. First, we have the list price. Next, we have the price 50. Well, we first have the price. Then we will have price 50 and price 100. So copy and paste that 2 more times here. We have price 50. And finally, we have price 100. Great. That looks good for create. Let me copy this and go to edit here, paste it right here. Perfect. Inside delete as well, we will have to paste that and we will remove the validation. On top of that, let me disable all the input fields when we are deleting. Perfect. That looks good. Finally, we have the index here. Scroll down. And in index, I want to display 5 properties: title, ISBN, the list price here, author, and category. Where we have the for each here, we do not need any order by. And first we have the title. Next we have ISBN. Whoops, not that. Just ISBN. Copy and paste that 3 more times. We have the list price. Next we have the author. And finally right here, I want the category. But in our current model, we do not know what is the category of a book or product. We will cover that in the upcoming videos, but this looks good. With that in place, let me add a navigation to that in underscore layout, views, shared, underscore layout. We have the drop down, copy the ally, paste it 1 more time. This will be for product. And that looks good. I believe that is all that was needed, but let me run the project and make sure that works. We will go to content management, product here, and great. We have the product list here. Let me try to edit. Perfect, that looks good. Whoops, description is 2 times. In edit, let me remove 1. And rather than input here, let me change that to be a text area. When we have text area, we need the explicit closing tag, else it will not work. When we save that, let's go back. The hot reload kicks in, and perfect, we have a text area. Now of course this is not perfect right now, but we will modify that in the upcoming videos. Right now if I try to update something here, it should work, and perfect, that is working. Let me revert it back here. Let me create a dummy product here. Create. That works. Let me try to delete that. And perfect. All the operations are working as expected. The only thing that I will change right now is add a little bit of space. So let me go back. And in all of the views here, where we have margin top of 4, let me make that margin Y. Save that. It was in the edit. Perfect. That looks good. So I will add this margin Y4 in all the places. Delete as well. I need the margin Y. Create margin Y. Index margin Y. Perfect. Let me save all. Go back here. And perfect. Now everything is looking much cleaner. But basically we have the product CRUD operation. Those are working as expected. Next thing that I want to work on here is when we are working with product, we need an association between product and category. If we go to category, it is action, sci-fi, and history. Basically any product that we have will belong to one of the category. So there will be a foreign key relation between product and category table. How can we accomplish that with EF Core? Now, if we did not have EF Core, we will basically have a column of category ID in the product table, and then we will have a constraint on foreign key which we will add in SQL Server. But thankfully, because of EF Core, we do not have to touch our database. All we have to do is define some constraint in our model, and Entity Framework will take care of everything else. So how can we accomplish that foreign key relation between category and product? Let me close all the tab here and let me open the model here, which is product model. There we basically need a column for category ID. So prop integer, I will call that category ID. Now if I add just this column, table will not know that this is a foreign key to the category table. In order to explicitly define that, we need a navigation property to the category table. So right here, we will have a navigation property to category table, and I will call that category. And on top of that, we have to explicitly define that this category property is used for foreign key navigation for the category ID. And for that, we have a data annotation of foreign key, and we can say that this category table has a foreign key which will be category ID right here. That is all that we have to write, and then Entity Framework Core will take care of everything else. So you can see how powerful Entity Framework Core really is. With that configured, let me save that, and I will add a migration. So we will add a migration, and I will call that add foreign key for category product relation. Now when you change anything with the core model, if it requires a database change, Entity Framework Core is smart enough and it does all of that. You can see it is adding a column here and it is updating some data. But when it is updating the data, you can see it is setting all the value to be 0 for category ID. That is not what we want. Because we are seeding our data, we need to actually pass category in that seed data. So this migration that got added, I am not happy with it because I am going to change something in the seed data and create a new migration. Now only because this migration has not been pushed to the database, I can directly come here and we can go to migrations and delete that migration. You do not want to do that directly here. You can go to Package Manager and you can write the command remove migration, and it will remove the last migration that was added. You can see in the migrations folder that migration does not exist anymore and it got removed. So now we can add a new migration, but before we do that, we have to fix our seed data that is inside application DB context. Here we have to pass a category ID. You can pass anything you want. I am going to be random about it. Some of them I will say 1, the other one I will say 2 here, and last one I will say 3. So perfect. We have assigned some value to the category ID, and when we are seeding, make sure that you use the category ID that exists and not something random like 11. That will not work. With that configured, let me go to Package Manager and I will add the migration once again. Perfect. Let me see the values. Yep, we have the correct value this time, and that looks good. So our migration is looking good. Let me update the database. And perfect, that is done. Let me go to SQL Server. We will do select top 1000. And great, we have category ID. On top of that, if you expand that and examine the keys, you will notice a foreign key relation between product and categories. So with that, if you try to edit here and if you try to enter, let's say 11, it will not work because of the foreign key relation. So with that, you can see how easy it was to add a foreign key relation between table. All we had to do is use the foreign key data annotation. With that configured, let me continue from the next video. Now before we move any forward, let me open the product model in the models project here, and I will add one more property which is kind of critical, and that is image URL. When we work with any product here, they will typically have an image, so let me call that as image URL. It will be a string property right now, and it will be empty right now. With that, let me save this, and we will have to add a migration. I will call that add image URL to product. The seed entity did not work. Well, you can go there in the data and you can add an empty image URL. That should work right now. We will fix that as we proceed with the course. Perfect. Let me add the migration once again and it should work. Perfect. Let's update the database. And great. Now our model for product is complete and we have added all the properties that are needed. How this image URL will work, that we will cover in the upcoming videos. What we want to work on is when we go to product and we edit a product or create a product, we cannot toggle the category. So let me fix that first. We need to add a drop-down right here. Before we even add that drop-down, we need a list of all the categories that we can display in the drop-down. So first we need to retrieve that in the controller. If I open the product controller, when we are passing it back to the view, we are passing list of product. On top of that, we need to pass list of all the categories, or we can pass a select list that we can use to populate a drop-down. Now there are multiple ways to pass that thing, but if we want to pass that along with this object, that is not possible because when we return back, we can only pass one object. We will see how to overcome that in the upcoming videos, but let's say you only want to return a list of product and not any other model. In that case, if we have to pass some additional functionalities, there are many other ways, but before we see how to pass that, we actually have to retrieve that. So to retrieve that, I will store that in an IEnumerable of select list item. If I press Ctrl dot here, it is inside system.collections.generic, that is the IEnumerable, and select list item is inside microsoft.asp.NET Core.mvc.rendering. Now if I press F12 on the select list item, it will navigate me to the class here, and you can see with the select list item, we have text and value, and that is what we will be populating and using in our dropdown. So let me call this category list is equal to, we need to retrieve all the categories, so unit of work dot category dot get all, and then if we just do that, it will not work because here it is retrieving an IEnumerable of category and we have to convert that to an IEnumerable of select list item. How can we do that dynamic conversion while we are retrieving some things from the database? In order to do that, we have something powerful known as projections in EF Core. In order to use projections, we will say .select, and there we will give it a random object. Let me call that U, And what object do we want to return from here? We want to return a new select list item. So we will write that, and inside there, what properties should be populated? Let me break it out in different line here. We want to populate the text, which is inside u.name, and value we want ID of the category. So u.id, convert that to a string. That way what will happen is each category object here will be converted into a select list item, and it will have a text and a value. And that is how we can convert a category to an IEnumerable of select list item using projection. Again, this is a very powerful feature because you can see how in a single line, when you are retrieving something, you can easily pick only some columns and not all the columns. You can convert that to a new object and directly assign that. With that, we have the category list right here. But now the question is, how do we pass that onto our view? Let me do that in the next video. Now we have to pass some data from our controller to our view. And for that we have multiple items or multiple routes that are available. First one here is a ViewBag. ViewBag transfers data from controller to view and not vice versa. And that is exactly what we want. We want to pass the data that we have in our controller to our view, and it is ideal for a situation in which the temporary data is not in a model. Like in our example, we need the drop-down list, and that is not within our model. We do not have a property to store that. So in that case, we can store this in a ViewBag and pass that to our view. ViewBag is a dynamic property that takes advantage of the new dynamic feature